poor fish-selling village girl risked her own life to save a wounded stranger from ruthless kidnappers. She had no idea the bleeding man she hid beneath piles of rotten fish was actually a billionaire heir being hunted, not by criminals, but by his own powerful mother. But what neither of them knew was even more shocking. The girl everyone called cursed was carrying a secret that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. A secret powerful enough to destroy one of the richest families in America. Why was a billionaire running for his life from his own mother? Why did armed men panic the moment they saw the village girl's old silver locket? And how could a poor fish seller unknowingly hold the key to a conspiracy that powerful people had spent years trying to bury? The answers began in a quiet fishing village where everyone believed they already knew the truth. Before the first rays of sunlight reached Harbor Creek, the village was already alive. Fishing boats drifted gently against old wooden docks while fishermen untangled their nets with practiced hands. Seagulls circled overhead, crying for scraps. The scent of salt water mixed with fresh fish filled the cool morning air, and one by one the villagers prepared for another ordinary day. For Emily Carter, there was nothing ordinary about surviving. At 23 years old, Emily owned nothing except a tiny weather-beaten cottage on the edge of the village, a pair of worn boots, a patched fishing apron, and a silver locket she never removed from her neck. The cottage had been built decades earlier by her grandfather. Years of sea wind had warped the walls, and every storm left another hole in the roof. Inside lived only Emily and her grandmother, Margaret Carter, whose worsening illness kept her confined to a rocking chair beside the small fireplace. Every dollar Emily earned selling fish paid for medicine, food, and firewood. Some weeks it wasn't enough for all three, yet every morning she rose before everyone else. She whispered softly as she lifted 2 heavy baskets. "Morning, Grandma," Margaret smiled weakly. "You hardly slept. Sleep after I sell everything." "You always say that," Emily laughed. "And one day it'll finally be true." Margaret watched her granddaughter disappear through the doorway. The old woman waited until Emily was gone before looking toward a faded family photograph resting on the mantel. A younger Margaret smiled beside her son, Daniel Carter, a broad-shouldered fisherman whose eyes carried quiet determination. Beside him stood his wife, Sarah, one hand resting gently on her pregnant stomach. The photograph had been taken only weeks before everything fell apart. Margaret closed her eyes. Some memories refused to grow old. 14 years earlier, Daniel had volunteered to sail into dangerous waters after another fishing crew became stranded during a violent storm. Everyone begged him to wait for the Coast Guard, but Daniel had answered with the same words he had lived by. "If someone is still alive out there, every minute matters." He never returned. His boat was eventually found shattered against distant rocks. His body was never recovered. The village mourned for only a few weeks before whispers began. Some claimed Daniel had been reckless. Others claimed his family carried bad luck. When Sarah disappeared months later without a note or explanation, cruel gossip hardened into certainty. People stopped saying the Carter family. They simply called them cursed. Margaret had never believed it. Neither had Emily. She simply learned there was no point arguing with people who preferred rumors over compassion. Outside, Emily balanced the baskets across her shoulders and walked toward the market. She passed neat homes painted in bright colors. Children laughed as they chased each other through the narrow streets. Several villagers greeted one another warmly. No one greeted Emily. Instead came the whispers. "There she goes, the cursed girl. My husband says don't buy from her. They say trouble follows wherever she walks." Emily heard every word. She simply kept walking. Years of humiliation had taught her that silence often preserved more dignity than anger. Across the village square stood the largest seafood stall in Harbor Creek. Its polished wooden sign read, "Walker Seafood." Fresh tuna, salmon, shrimp, and lobster rested neatly on crushed ice beneath colorful banners advertising the lowest prices in town. The business belonged to Richard Walker, Harbor Creek's wealthiest seafood merchant. He owned several fishing boats, supplied restaurants in nearby cities, and lived in the biggest house overlooking the harbor. His only daughter, Grace Walker, had inherited not only his wealth but also his arrogance. Grace noticed Emily approaching and folded her expensive jacket across her arms with a smug smile. "Well," she called loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, "if it isn't Harbor Creek's walking bad omen." Several shoppers laughed. Emily calmly placed her baskets onto her tiny wooden table. She began arranging the fish without replying. Grace stepped closer. "You know," she said with a mocking smile, "I'd almost feel sorry for you if people didn't lose their appetite every time they saw your face." More laughter. A little boy tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, Miss Emily always smiles. Can we buy from her today?" His mother immediately pulled him back. "No. Why? We don't invite bad luck into our home." Emily paused for the briefest moment, only long enough for sadness to pass across her face before she forced another gentle smile. "That's all right," she whispered. "I hope you both have a wonderful day." Little boy looked back at her with confusion as his mother hurried him away. Grace rolled her eyes. "I don't know why you even bother pretending." Emily finally looked at her. "Because kindness costs me nothing." The first time that morning, Grace had no answer. As customers continued avoiding Emily's stall, an elderly fisherman named Walter Brooks quietly approached. "Take two." Emily wrapped the fish carefully. "Be $12. Walter handed her 30. "You gave me too much," Walter replied gently. "Some debts can't be measured with money." Emily tried returning the extra bills, but Walter simply smiled and walked away. She watched him disappear into the crowd before opening the cloth pouch where she kept her earnings. It contained barely enough money to buy her grandmother's next bottle of medicine. As she tucked the pouch safely beneath her apron, her fingers brushed the silver locket resting against her chest. Without opening it, she instinctively held it close. Inside was a faded photograph whose importance even she did not fully understand. Far beyond Harbor Creek, in a world of private jets, towering skyscrapers, and billion-dollar boardrooms, another family carried secrets connected to that very locket. Neither Emily nor anyone in the village could imagine that before the next sunrise, those two worlds would collide, and nothing would ever be the same again. Hundreds of miles away from the quiet shores of Harbor Creek, the morning unfolded very differently. The Harrison estate stood behind towering iron gates surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured gardens. The mansion itself looked more like a palace than a home, its marble columns gleaming beneath the morning sun. Luxury sports cars lined the circular driveway. Uniformed security guards patrolled every entrance. Inside, priceless paintings, crystal chandeliers, and handcrafted furniture reflected the unimaginable wealth of one of America's most powerful families. The Harrison family controlled Harrison Global Holdings, a multinational corporation valued at hundreds of billions of dollars. Its investments stretched across shipping, technology, energy, luxury hotels, finance, and commercial real estate. Thousands of employees depended on decisions made inside the mansion's private boardroom. Yet despite all the wealth surrounding him, Ethan Harrison felt like a prisoner. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom, the 30-year-old billionaire heir stared toward the locked front gates. "Adding more guards," he muttered. His longtime personal assistant, Samuel Brooks, quietly entered the room after making sure no one had followed him. "Not guards anymore," Samuel said in a low voice. "Your mother replaced most of them last week." Ethan turned. "With who?" "Former military contractors." A heavy silence settled between them. Samuel had worked for Ethan's late father for nearly 30 years. He had watched Ethan grow from a curious little boy into a capable businessman. More importantly, he had quietly become the closest thing Ethan had to family. "You were right," Samuel continued. "I checked their records. They're loyal to Mrs. Harrison, not to the company." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I can't stay here anymore." Samuel hesitated. "If you leave now, she'll come after you." "I know. She won't send lawyers." "I know." Another long silence followed. Years earlier, none of this would have seemed possible. Ethan's father, William Harrison, had built Harrison Global into one of the largest corporations in America. Unlike many billionaires, William believed wealth carried responsibility. He spent time with employees, personally visited company factories, and often told Ethan that a leader's greatest asset was trust. Those lessons shaped Ethan. As a teenager, William insisted his son work ordinary summer jobs within the company instead of receiving executive privileges. Ethan had loaded shipping containers, worked warehouse shifts, and even cleaned factory floors. William believed a future CEO should understand every employee's struggle. Those experiences explained why Ethan spoke respectfully to workers despite his immense wealth, a character trait that would later feel completely natural when he met Emily. Then everything changed. 5 years earlier, William Harrison died in what authorities called a tragic helicopter accident. The official investigation blamed mechanical failure. The media accepted the conclusion, but Ethan never fully believed it. He remembered the night before the accident. His father had entered his study carrying a thick leather folder marked confidential. "Uncovered something inside the company," William had said quietly. "What is it?" "Not ready to tell you yet." "It's serious." William had smiled, though the worry in his eyes betrayed him. "If anything ever happens to me," he paused, "trust people because they earn it, not because they wear expensive suits." Those had been his final words to Ethan. The next morning, the helicopter exploded over a remote mountain range. The confidential folder disappeared. No one ever found it. Within days, Ethan's mother, Victoria Harrison, assumed complete control of Harrison Global. At first, Ethan believed they would lead the company together. Instead, Victoria slowly dismantled every safeguard William had established. Trusted executives were quietly dismissed. Independent board members resigned under mysterious circumstances. New advisors, all fiercely loyal to Victoria, took their places. Ethan objected repeatedly, but each decision required only a board majority, and Victoria always seemed one vote ahead. Then came the latest betrayal. 3 nights earlier, Victoria had invited Ethan to what she described as a family dinner. Instead, he found executives, lawyers, photographers, and another billionaire family waiting inside the grand ballroom. Victoria had smiled proudly. "Ethan," she announced, "I'd like you to meet your fiancé." Across the room stood Olivia Kensington, daughter of another billionaire industrialist, beautiful, elegant, cold. Olivia extended her hand. "Heard a lot about you." Ethan didn't take it. "What is this?" Victoria's smile never faded. "A merger." Asking about the woman. "They're the same thing." Room fell silent. Victoria calmly explained that marrying Olivia would unite both corporate empires, creating one of the most powerful business dynasties in the country. Lawyers had already drafted the agreements. The engagement announcement was scheduled for the following week. "You arranged my marriage without asking me. I arranged your future." "You arranged your own power." Victoria's eyes hardened. "You will marry Olivia." "No, you don't have a choice." "I just made one." Ethan walked out. By the next morning, every exit from the estate had additional security. His phone was monitored. His bank accounts required dual authorization. Even his vehicle keys disappeared. Only then did Ethan fully understand. His mother wasn't protecting him. She was imprisoning him. Back in the present, Samuel reached into his coat and removed a small envelope. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "Cash. An old pickup truck is waiting behind the maintenance garage. You planned this. I promised your father I'd always protect you." Samuel's voice trembled. He knew one day you might need someone who wasn't afraid of your mother. Ethan looked at the envelope but didn't take it immediately. "If I leave," Samuel nodded, "I'll probably lose my job." "You could lose much more than that. Lived a long life." He smiled faintly. "But I couldn't live with myself if I watched William's son become another prisoner in his own home." Ethan embraced the older man. "Thank you." Samuel handed him a folded map. "There are safe routes marked in blue. Avoid highways. Mrs. Harrison will expect you to use them." Ethan slipped the map into his jacket. As he quietly exited through the servants' corridor, neither man noticed a tiny security camera hidden inside a decorative wall clock. Miles away, inside her private office, Victoria Harrison watched the live security feed. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. She slowly picked up her phone. "Leaving," she said calmly. "Activate Team Black." A deep male voice answered. "Alive or dead?" Victoria stared at a framed photograph of Ethan as a child. Then she replied without emotion, "Alive." A brief pause. "But if anyone gets between you and my son." She ended the sentence with chilling calm. "Remove the obstacle." She hung up. Outside the estate, 3 black SUVs quietly started their engines. Their destination: Harbor Creek. The old pickup truck rattled as it rolled down a lonely two-lane highway, its engine coughing every few miles as if reminding Ethan Harrison that it had long outlived its best days. He didn't mind. For the first time in years, he wasn't sitting in the back of a chauffeured limousine or flying in a private jet with assistants hovering over him. The cracked steering wheel beneath his hands felt strangely comforting. It represented something money had never been able to buy him: freedom. The envelope Samuel had given him rested on the passenger seat beside a folded road map. He had deliberately left behind every credit card, every expensive watch, and every item that could instantly identify him as one of America's richest men. He wore faded jeans, an old gray hoodie, and a baseball cap purchased from a roadside gas station. Even the luxury shoes he had worn that morning now lay abandoned in a trash bin several counties away. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. His father had once told him that when powerful people wanted to find someone, they didn't begin by searching for faces. They searched for habits: luxury hotels, private airports, exclusive restaurants, credit card transactions. Ethan intended to become invisible. Samuel's blue markings on the map guided him away from major highways and toward forgotten coastal roads that rarely appeared on GPS routes. William Harrison had quietly purchased land throughout the country over the years, often traveling through small communities ordinary executives ignored. During those trips, he would tell Ethan that if he ever wanted to understand America, he needed to leave the skyscrapers behind and meet the people whose names never appeared in financial magazines. Those memories surfaced now like fragments of another life. He smiled faintly. "You were right, Dad." His smile disappeared as the rearview mirror reflected two black SUVs merging onto the same road several hundred yards behind him. His grip tightened. "No." He accelerated. The trucks accelerated too. His heartbeat quickened. "They found me already." He glanced toward the dashboard clock. Less than 45 minutes had passed since leaving the estate. Only a handful of people had known his escape plan. Samuel, the house staff, or... His eyes narrowed, the security cameras. He suddenly remembered walking beneath the antique wall clock outside the servants' corridor. His stomach sank. They never lost me. Behind him, the lead SUV pulled closer. Inside sat 6 heavily armed men dressed in tactical clothing without company logos or police insignia. Their leader, Marcus Kane, calmly watched Ethan through binoculars. Positive visual. Driver asked, "Orders." Marcus touched the earpiece connected to his radio. "We stay with him." A woman's voice answered immediately, "Victoria Harrison. Want my son alive. May resist. Always does." "What about witnesses?" A long pause followed. Victoria finally replied, "I trust your judgment." Transmission ended. Marcus understood exactly what she meant. No unnecessary survivors. The SUVs surged forward. Ahead, Ethan noticed flashing construction signs narrowing the highway into a single lane. Traffic slowed instantly. This can't be happening. Cars boxed him in. The SUVs gained ground. Marcus smiled. Cornered. Without hesitation, Ethan jerked the steering wheel sharply onto an abandoned gravel service road running beside the construction site. The pickup bounced violently over loose rocks. Dust exploded behind the tires. The SUVs followed. Branches slapped against Ethan's windshield as the narrow path wound through dense forest. The old truck groaned with every turn. "Come on, just a little farther." Map showed a coastal road beyond the woods. If he reached it, he might disappear into fishing communities where nobody would recognize his face. Then, bang! A gunshot shattered his rear window. Glass exploded across the cab. Ethan instinctively ducked. Another bullet tore through the passenger door. Shooting already? He pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck fishtailed around a bend before crashing through a rusted farm gate. Beyond it stretched open fields leading toward the coastline. For a brief moment, hope returned. Then another shot rang out. Pain exploded through his left shoulder. He gasped. Warm blood soaked through his hoodie almost instantly. His left arm weakened. The steering wheel slipped. No. The pickup struck a massive tree with a deafening crash. Airbags exploded. Everything spun. Silence. A ringing sound filled his ears. Smoke drifted from beneath the crushed hood. Ethan forced himself awake. Every breath hurt. Blood dripped steadily onto the torn driver's seat. He unbuckled his seatbelt with trembling fingers and stumbled out of the wreckage just as one SUV emerged from the trees. Here. He couldn't outrun them, not injured, not bleeding this heavily. Then he noticed something beyond the field: tall marsh grass, mangrove trees, a narrow footpath leading toward the coast. Without another thought, Ethan ran. Every step sent burning pain through his shoulder. Behind him came shouting. Went into the marsh. Marcus climbed from the SUV and calmly examined drops of blood scattered across the grass. He won't get far. One kidnapper pointed toward the distant coastline. There's a fishing village beyond those mangroves. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we search every house. Meanwhile, several miles away, Emily finished another disappointing morning at the market. Nearly half her fish remained unsold. She sighed as she rearranged the baskets on a small wooden handcart. Ace Walker walked past with a smug smile. Looks like another terrible day. Emily shrugged gently. Might be better, Grace laughed. You always say that, Emily smiled. Because tomorrow always deserves a chance. She began pushing the cart toward home. The coastal shortcut she always used wound through quiet mangrove trails where fishermen often gathered oysters during low tide. It saved nearly 30 minutes compared to the main road. As she walked, she paused briefly beside a weathered wooden cross overlooking the sea. Fresh wildflowers rested at its base. No name appeared on it, only the words "lost." But never forgotten. Emily gently touched the cross. I still miss you, Dad, she continued walking. Several minutes later, she heard something, not waves, not birds. A man's painful groan echoed from deep inside the mangroves. Emily stopped. Another groan, then silence. She looked around. No one else was nearby. Her grandmother had often warned her never to wander alone into the marsh. But Emily remembered something else. Years ago, when she was only a little girl, her father had once carried an injured fisherman home after everyone else had been too afraid to help. That memory returned vividly. If you ever find someone hurt, Daniel had told her while gently cleaning the fisherman's wounds, don't ask whether helping is convenient. Ask whether you'd pray for someone to help you if our places were reversed. Emily took a slow breath. Then, without another thought, she stepped off the path and followed the sound deeper into the mangroves. Unseen by her, several pairs of armed eyes were already searching the very same marsh. The deeper Emily walked into the mangroves, the quieter the world became. The cheerful sounds of Harbor Creek slowly faded behind her, replaced by the rhythmic crashing of distant waves against the shoreline and the soft rustling of tall reeds swaying in the sea breeze. Twisted mangrove roots rose from the muddy ground like giant fingers, forcing her to move carefully as she followed the faint cries for help. She tightened her grip on the wooden handle of her fish cart. "Hello?" she called cautiously. No answer, only another low groan. Emily hesitated. Her grandmother's warnings echoed in her mind. Never wander too far into the marsh alone. If trouble finds you out there, nobody will hear you scream. For a brief moment, fear urged her to turn around. Then another memory surfaced. Years earlier, Daniel Carter had returned home carrying an unconscious fisherman over his shoulder after rescuing him from a capsized boat. Emily had asked why he had risked his own life for someone he barely knew. Her father had smiled while washing the man's wounds. The easiest thing in the world is to walk away from someone else's pain, he had told her. The hardest, and the right thing, is to stop. That lesson had stayed with her long after he disappeared. Emily took another cautious step. "Know you're here," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." A weak voice answered from behind a cluster of reeds. "Help." She hurried toward the sound. There, half hidden beneath tangled branches, lay a man covered in mud and blood. His gray hoodie was torn across the shoulder, revealing a gunshot wound that continued to bleed steadily. Dirt streaked his face, and one side of his forehead had been cut during the crash. His breathing was shallow, and every attempt to move seemed to send waves of pain through his body. Emily dropped to her knees. "Oh my goodness." The stranger struggled to focus on her face. "Shouldn't be here." She ignored the warning. Instead, she carefully examined his shoulder without touching the wound. She wasn't a doctor, but she recognized enough from years of helping injured fishermen to know one thing immediately. "If I don't stop the bleeding, you'll die." Man tried to sit up. "No." His voice cracked. "You have to leave." Emily frowned. "Who's chasing you?" He looked toward the trees instead of answering. That single glance told her everything she needed to know. Someone was coming. She quickly removed the clean cloth she kept wrapped around today's unsold fish and folded it into a thick pad. This is going to hurt. Without waiting for permission, she pressed firmly against the wound. The stranger groaned through clenched teeth. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered. "I know." She tied the cloth tightly around his shoulder to slow the bleeding. The knot held, not perfectly, but enough. Another memory quietly explained why she moved with such confidence. After Daniel's disappearance, Harbor Creek had suffered several seasons when storms frequently injured local fishermen. With no clinic nearby, Margaret had taught Emily the basic first aid techniques she herself had learned from an old coastal nurse decades earlier. Cleaning wounds, stopping bleeding, treating broken bones. Those skills had become ordinary parts of village life. They were about to save a billionaire's life. The stranger looked at her with disbelief. "Done this before," she smiled gently, "only for fishermen." He gave a weak laugh despite the pain. "I guess. Today I'm one of them." Before Emily could reply, voices echoed through the mangroves. "There, I found blood. They can't be far." The stranger's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened with alarm. "Here." Emily froze. The voices were getting closer. Heavy footsteps splashed through shallow water. Branches snapped. A man's voice barked sharp orders. "Spread out. Search every inch of this marsh." Emily looked around frantically. There was nowhere to run. The injured stranger tried to push himself upright. "Distract them," Emily whispered. "Kill you. If they find you helping me." "I know." He stared at her. "You don't even know my name." She looked directly into his eyes. "I know you're hurt." "That's enough." For a split second, he forgot the pain. No one had spoken to him with such simple compassion in years. The voices were almost on top of them now. Emily's eyes darted toward her overturned fish cart. An idea flashed through her mind. It was unpleasant, disgusting, but it just might work. She quickly dragged the stranger behind a thick patch of mangrove roots. "Can you stay still?" "I'll try. Matter what happens, don't move." She grabbed the baskets from her cart. One still contained fish she had hoped to sell tomorrow. The other held the spoiled leftovers she normally buried far from the village because of the unbearable smell. Without hesitation, she dumped the rotten fish over the fishing net stacked beside the stranger. The odor spread instantly. Even Emily covered her nose. She then pulled several old nets over him, carefully leaving enough space for him to breathe. From a few feet away, he looked like nothing more than abandoned fishing equipment surrounded by spoiled seafood. She whispered, "Trust me." He nodded weakly. Emily barely had time to stand before 6 armed men emerged from the trees. They stopped only yards away. The leader, Marcus Kane, studied her carefully. His sharp eyes moved from the fish cart to the nets, then back to Emily. "You." Emily forced herself to remain calm. "Can I help you?" Marcus took one slow step closer. "We're looking for someone." Emily tilted her head innocently. "Out here, a man." "I haven't seen anyone." Marcus wasn't convinced. His gaze drifted toward the pile of nets, then toward the blood-stained mud only a few feet away. His expression hardened. He raised his hand. "Search everything." Emily's heartbeat thundered inside her chest. One wrong step, one careless glance, and both their lives would end right there in the mangroves. Emily's heart pounded so hard she was certain the armed men could hear it. 6 strangers in dark tactical clothing spread through the mangroves with practiced precision. They weren't behaving like ordinary criminals. They moved in coordinated pairs, scanning the ground, watching one another's blind spots, communicating with subtle hand signals instead of shouting. Whoever they were, they had military training. Marcus Kane stood perfectly still, studying Emily's face instead of joining the search. Years of tracking fugitives had taught him that frightened people rarely lied well. They looked away too quickly, talked too much, or became unnaturally quiet. But the young woman before him was different. She looked nervous, anyone would, but her concern seemed directed toward the armed strangers surrounding her rather than toward herself. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What are you doing out here?" Emily tightened her grip on the handle of her fish cart. "I was heading home." He glanced at the baskets. "With rotten fish," she nodded. "The fresh ones didn't sell." She pointed to the second basket. "The spoiled ones can't be left near the village. They attract wild dogs, so I bury them out here." It was the truth, just not the entire truth. Marcus slowly walked toward the pile of fishing nets. Hidden beneath them, Ethan fought to remain conscious. The smell of spoiled fish was overwhelming. Blood continued soaking through the makeshift bandage Emily had tied around his shoulder, but he didn't dare move. He could hear every footstep, every voice, every breath. A single cough would end everything. Marcus stopped beside the nets. He looked down, then he crouched. Ethan instinctively held his breath. One of the kidnappers approached. "Boss, we found footprints leading this way." Marcus examined the muddy ground. The blood trail ended only a few feet from where he was kneeling. That didn't make sense. An injured man couldn't simply vanish unless... He reached toward the edge of one fishing net. Emily's pulse raced. Without thinking, she hurried forward. "Don't touch those." Every weapon immediately turned toward her. Marcus slowly stood. "Why not?" Emily forced herself to wrinkle her nose. "Because they're covered in rotten fish." One of the men laughed. "Been sitting in the sun for 2 days." Another kidnapper stepped closer, then immediately recoiled. "Oh, that's disgusting." Even Marcus noticed the overpowering odor now. The spoiled fish Emily had poured over the nets had begun attracting flies. The stench was thick enough to make breathing unpleasant. He stared at the pile for another few seconds, then he looked back at Emily. "You live nearby?" "Yes." "Alone?" "My grandmother lives with me." "Anyone else?" "No." Marcus watched her carefully. Emily met his eyes without looking away. Her father had once told her that honest people shouldn't fear eye contact, even when others tried to intimidate them. That childhood lesson now helped save both their lives. One of the kidnappers shouted from farther inside the marsh. "Boss, we found fresh tire tracks near the old service road." Marcus glanced toward the voice. The tracks could belong to their target or someone else. Either way, they couldn't ignore them. He turned back to Emily one last time. "If you see an injured man, tell the sheriff." Marcus nodded slowly. "Do that." He signaled his team. "Move out." 6 men disappeared into the mangroves almost as quickly as they had arrived. Emily remained perfectly still. She counted silently 1, 2, 3. Nearly 2 full minutes passed before she finally exhaled. Only then did she rush toward the fishing nets. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're gone." There was no response. Fear gripped her. Had he died? Her hands trembled as she pulled away the heavy nets. Ethan lay motionless. "Please." She gently touched his face. His eyes opened. For the first time since they met, he smiled. "You smell terrible." Emily blinked, then she laughed, a genuine laugh. "So do you." Several precious seconds, they simply laughed together despite everything that had happened. The tension finally broke. "I can't believe that worked," Ethan said weakly. Emily shook her head. "Neither can I." He slowly sat up, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. "You should have left me. Let them kill you. They would have spared you." Emily looked toward the path where the kidnappers had disappeared. "I'm not so sure." She had noticed something Marcus probably didn't realize. When he had spoken into the small microphone hidden beneath his collar, he hadn't sounded worried about witnesses. He had sounded like a man receiving permission. That frightened her more than the guns. She helped Ethan lean against a mangrove tree. His face had grown pale from blood loss. "You need a doctor." "I can't go to hospital." "Why?" "They'll find me." Emily studied him carefully. His hands caught her attention. Despite the dirt covering them, they weren't rough like a fisherman's. There were no old rope burns. No deep scars from years of hauling heavy nets. His fingernails were neatly trimmed. His speech was calm, educated, almost refined. Even now, injured and exhausted, he carried himself differently from anyone she had ever met. A tiny seed of curiosity settled in her mind. Who was he? She almost asked. Instead, she said, "Can you walk?" "I think so." He stood. His knees immediately buckled. Emily caught him before he hit the ground. For someone so slim, she was surprisingly strong. Years of carrying heavy baskets of fish from the docks to the marketplace had built quiet strength into her arms and shoulders. It wasn't extraordinary. It was simply the result of years of hard work. Another potential logic gap resolved itself naturally. Ethan looked at her with surprise. "Stronger than you look." Emily smiled. "You try carrying 60 pounds of fish every morning." He couldn't help smiling back. "My name's..." He hesitated. If he revealed his real identity, she might recognize it from the news. His mother controlled enough media outlets to spread almost any story she wanted. By now, she could already be calling him unstable or dangerous. He made a decision. "My name is Eric." The lie came quietly. It wasn't spoken to manipulate Emily. It was spoken to protect her. The less she knew about him, the safer she would be if those men returned. Emily extended her hand. "I'm Emily." He shook it. "Thank you, Emily." She looked toward the distant village. My house isn't far, he frowned. I can't involve you, you already have. Only bring trouble. Emily glanced back toward the mangroves where the kidnappers had disappeared, then she looked him straight in the eye. My father used to say that doing the right thing usually brings trouble first. She smiled softly. But he also said it's still the right thing. For a brief moment, Ethan saw not just kindness in her eyes, but courage, the kind of courage money could never buy. As the sun slowly dipped lower over Harbor Creek, Emily slipped Ethan's arm over her shoulder. Together, they began the slow walk toward the tiny cottage waiting on the edge of the village. Neither of them noticed a small trail of blood left behind in the mud, far back in the mangroves. Marcus Kane returned to the exact spot they had searched. He crouched beside the footprints. Then his fingers brushed against something half buried beneath the reeds, fresh blood. His expression darkened. He looked toward Harbor Creek. Hiding him. Walk back to Harbor Creek felt much longer than it usually did. Emily supported most of Ethan's weight as they followed the narrow coastal path that curved around the mangroves. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow across the water, but neither of them noticed the beauty around them. Ethan's breathing had become heavier with every step, and despite the cloth wrapped tightly around his shoulder, blood continued to seep through the bandage. Emily glanced at him every few moments. Tell me if you're feeling dizzy. He managed a tired smile. I passed dizzy about 10 minutes ago. She couldn't help smiling. Well, try not to pass anything worse. Do my best. Even in pain, Ethan laughed softly. It surprised him. For years, conversations in his world had revolved around stock prices, board meetings, acquisitions, and carefully rehearsed social events where every smile carried a hidden agenda. No one joked when billions of dollars were at stake. Yet here was a young woman with barely enough money to feed herself, making him laugh while he bled through his shirt. He found himself stealing glances at her. Emily's clothes were simple. Her boots were worn. Loose strands of brown hair escaped from beneath the scarf covering her head, and the sleeves of her faded shirt had been patched more than once. Nothing about her suggested wealth. Everything about her reflected hard work. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She never complained. She never asked for pity. She simply kept walking. The path opened onto the edge of Harbor Creek. Emily immediately slowed. The village wasn't large. People noticed strangers almost instantly, especially strangers who looked injured. We can't use the main road, she whispered. Why? Questions. She led him behind a row of abandoned fishing sheds where old boats and broken lobster traps had been left to weather in the sea air. Few villagers came there anymore. As they carefully made their way through the back paths, Ethan noticed how modest the community was. Small wooden cottages lined the shore. Children kicked a worn soccer ball across an open field. An elderly man repaired fishing nets outside his porch. A woman hung freshly washed clothes on a clothesline while humming quietly. Nobody drove expensive cars. Nobody wore designer clothes. It was a world completely different from the one he had known. A sudden memory surfaced. Years ago, William Harrison had once canceled an important business meeting to spend an afternoon in a small coastal town after seeing local fishermen struggling to repair storm-damaged boats. Ethan, then 16, had questioned the decision. Dad, isn't the meeting more important? William had smiled while helping pull a damaged boat onto shore. Meetings create profits. He handed Ethan a coil of rope. People create purpose. That lesson had confused Ethan at the time. Now, watching Emily quietly greet neighbors who rarely greeted her back, he finally understood. Not everyone measured wealth with money. As they approached the last row of cottages, an elderly fisherman named Walter Brooks looked up from repairing a net. His experienced eyes immediately noticed Ethan's condition. Emily, she froze. Walter walked over slowly. Who's your friend? Emily hesitated. His name is Eric. Walter studied the bloodstained bandage without asking unnecessary questions. Years spent at sea had taught him something valuable. Sometimes helping meant asking fewer questions. Need a hand? Emily nodded gratefully. Walter slipped beneath Ethan's other arm. Now, son. Together, they guided him toward the small cottage at the far edge of the village. Unlike the brightly painted homes closer to the harbor, Emily's house stood alone beside a weather-beaten fence overlooking the sea. The roof sagged slightly. Several wooden boards had been nailed over broken windows. A tiny vegetable garden struggled to grow beside the porch despite the salty soil. The place wasn't beautiful, but it was clean and cared for. Inside, Margaret Carter looked up from her rocking chair as the front door opened. The smile on her face disappeared instantly. "Emily," her eyes widened. "Who's this?" Emily carefully helped Ethan onto the old couch before answering. "I found him injured in the mangroves." Margaret struggled to stand. "You brought him here? He would have died." Margaret looked from Ethan to the blood soaking through the bandage, then back to Emily. "Child, barely have enough food for ourselves." "I know. Now armed men may come looking for him." "I know. Can't afford this." Emily knelt beside her grandmother. Her voice remained calm. "If Grandpa had been lying injured somewhere, wouldn't we pray that someone would help him?" Margaret's shoulders slowly sank. The old woman closed her eyes. Daniel had inherited that exact stubborn compassion from his father. Now Emily carried it too. There was no changing her mind. Margaret sighed deeply. "Your father always did leave me outnumbered." Emily smiled. "So, is that a yes?" Margaret tried to hide her smile. "Suppose throwing him back into the marsh would be rather unkind." Ethan spoke for the first time. "I'm sorry." Margaret looked toward him. "You have nothing to apologize for. Brought danger to your home." She studied him quietly. Despite his worn clothes, his manners immediately caught her attention. The way he spoke, the way he thanked people, the way he waited before interrupting. Those weren't habits learned overnight. Margaret had lived long enough to recognize good upbringing. "You were raised by decent people," she said softly. Pain flickered across Ethan's face. "I was." Answer was true, even if it was incomplete. Emily fetched a basin of warm water while Margaret opened an old wooden cabinet containing a small tin box filled with bandages, herbal ointments, clean cloth, and basic medical supplies. Ethan looked surprised. "You keep all this?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Fishing villages don't always have doctors nearby." Emily gently removed the blood-soaked cloth from his shoulder. The wound looked angry but clean. "The bullet passed through," Margaret observed. "That's fortunate." Ethan looked at Emily. "You knew to stop the bleeding." Emily shrugged. "My grandmother taught me." Margaret chuckled softly. "Actually, your grandfather taught me." A brief flashback unfolded in Ethan's mind as Margaret carefully cleaned the wound. Years earlier, Daniel had returned from the docks with a young fisherman whose arm had been torn open by a snapped cable. Margaret had calmly stitched the wound while 12-year-old Emily watched every movement with wide, determined eyes. "Watch carefully," Margaret had whispered back then. "One day someone may need these hands." That day had finally arrived. As Emily carefully tied a fresh bandage around Ethan's shoulder, he watched her concentration. She wasn't trying to impress him. She simply wanted him to live. No cameras, no recognition, no reward, just kindness. Something inside him shifted. For the first time since his father's death, the walls around his heart began to crack. Outside the cottage, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees overlooking the property, Marcus Kane lowered a pair of binoculars. He had found the blood trail, and now he had found the house. A slow smile crossed his face. "Made this easier than I expected." He reached for the radio clipped to his vest. Target confirmed. Then he looked back at the little cottage where laughter briefly drifted through the open window. They have no idea what's coming. The little cottage settled into an uneasy silence as evening wrapped Harbor Creek in shades of orange and deep blue. The sea breeze drifted through the open kitchen window, carrying the familiar scent of salt water and distant fishing boats returning to the docks. Inside, the room was lit by a single old lamp that flickered every now and then because the village's electricity was unreliable. Emily carefully folded the blood-stained cloth she had removed from Ethan's shoulder and dropped it into a bucket of water. Margaret watched her quietly. She knew her granddaughter well enough to recognize what was happening. Emily had already decided that this stranger would remain in their home until he recovered. Trying to change her mind would be like trying to stop the tide. Margaret turned toward Ethan. "My name is Margaret Carter." He smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure nice is the word I'd use under these circumstances." Emily chuckled. "Grandma, what? He's bleeding on my couch." The first time that day, Ethan laughed without forcing it. "Try to bleed somewhere cheaper next time." Margaret fought a smile. "Oh, good. At least he's got a sense of humor." Tension inside the room eased. It had been years since laughter filled the cottage. Most evenings were spent worrying about unpaid bills, failing roofs, or whether Emily had earned enough money to buy Margaret's medicine. Tonight, despite the danger sitting on their old couch, the house somehow felt less lonely. Emily moved into the tiny kitchen. She opened the cupboard, her smile faded. One bag of rice, half an onion, a few potatoes, one small loaf of bread. That was everything. She quietly closed the cupboard before Ethan could notice. Make dinner. Margaret watched her granddaughter pretend not to be worried. The old woman slowly stood and followed Emily into the kitchen. In a low voice, she asked, "How much money did you make today?" Emily opened the small cloth pouch. Margaret counted the bills. Her heart sank. "It isn't enough." "I know. Still need my medicine tomorrow." "I know. Now we have another mouth to feed." Emily remained silent. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. "I wasn't blaming you." "I know. I'm only afraid." Emily looked toward the living room where Ethan sat staring out the window. "So am I." Margaret followed her gaze. "You trust him?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "I don't know him." "Then why bring him here?" Emily's eyes drifted toward the old family photograph hanging on the wall. Because 14 years earlier, someone had never come home. A quiet flashback returned. 12-year-old Emily had sat on the front steps every evening for nearly 3 months, waiting for her father's fishing boat to appear on the horizon. Every sunset ended the same way, an empty sea. Then one afternoon she had asked Margaret a question that still haunted the old woman. If Daddy was hurt somewhere, do you think someone helped him? Margaret had never known how to answer. Back in the present, Emily whispered, "I always hoped someone tried." Margaret felt tears gathering in her eyes. Understood, Emily wasn't only helping Ethan, she was honoring the father she had never stopped loving. The old woman nodded slowly. "Then let's feed our guest." Few minutes later, Emily carried 3 bowls of simple vegetable soup to the table. She quietly placed the largest bowl in front of Ethan. He frowned. "This should go to your grandmother." Margaret immediately spoke. "My granddaughter cooked." "Then Emily should have it." Emily smiled. "I already tasted some while cooking." It was a lie, a gentle one. She hadn't eaten since sunrise. Ethan noticed something strange. Emily's bowl looked much smaller. He looked back toward the cooking pot, almost empty. He suddenly understood. Without saying anything, he picked up his spoon and divided nearly half his soup into Emily's bowl. She blinked. "What are you doing?" "I can't finish all this." "You can. I really can't." She pushed the bowl back. He pushed it toward her again. Margaret quietly watched the exchange. Neither of them realized she could see through both lies. Emily was pretending she wasn't hungry. Ethan was pretending he wasn't giving away his own meal. Margaret smiled to herself. Perhaps kindness recognized kindness. Eventually, Emily sighed. "Stubborn," Ethan smiled. "So I've been told." They ate together, simple soup, dry bread, no expensive wine, no crystal glasses. Yet Ethan couldn't remember the last meal that had felt this peaceful. At the Harrison mansion, dinners had always resembled business negotiations. Every conversation carried hidden motives here. Margaret complained about seagulls stealing laundry from the clothesline. Emily laughed while telling the story of a crab that had once escaped a customer's bucket and chased Grace Walker around the marketplace. Even Ethan laughed so hard he accidentally winced from his injured shoulder. Ouch. Emily immediately became serious. "Not supposed to laugh that hard. I'm beginning to think smiling is dangerous around here. As if you tear your stitches." Room filled with laughter once again. Outside, Marcus Kane remained hidden among the trees. Through binoculars, he watched the family eating dinner. He lowered the glasses thoughtfully, acting like they've known each other for years. One of his men stepped beside him. Didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the cottage. Only 3 people inside, an elderly woman, a young fish seller, one wounded billionaire. Simple, too simple. Years of experience made him cautious. "Tonight," man looked surprised. "We have the target." Marcus nodded. "And a fishing village full of witnesses." "They're poor villagers. They're still witnesses." He looked toward the harbor. Fishing boats were returning. Families were walking home. Children still played outside. An operation now would attract attention. "We wait until morning." He glanced back toward the cottage. People make mistakes when they think they've survived. His radio vibrated. Victoria Harrison's voice came through. "Status." Marcus answered calmly. "We located your son." "Then why haven't you secured him? He has civilians around him." "I gave you clear instructions." Marcus remained silent. Victoria continued, "I don't care about the villagers." Marcus already knew that she had never cared about anyone standing between her ambitions and her goals, but he also knew something Victoria often forgot. Dead witnesses attracted investigators, missing witnesses created rumors, living witnesses could sometimes be controlled. "Bring him back tomorrow," Marcus said. "Better." The call ended. Marcus stared once more at the tiny cottage. His eyes settled briefly on Emily. She was helping Ethan change his bandage. There was genuine concern on her face. Marcus quietly murmured, "You're risking everything. For a man whose real name you don't even know." Inside, Ethan looked around the modest room. His eyes landed on a faded silver locket hanging around Emily's neck. For just a second, something about it seemed strangely familiar, not the locket itself. The intricate crest engraved on its surface. Where had he seen that design before? Before he could think further, Emily noticed him staring. She smiled awkwardly. "What?" Ethan shook his head. "Nothing." But somewhere deep in his memory, a forgotten piece of the past had just begun to awaken. The moon hung high above Harbor Creek, casting a silver glow across the calm ocean. Gentle waves lapped against the wooden docks while most of the village settled into sleep. Inside Emily's cottage, however, sleep refused to come. Ethan lay awake on the old couch, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, memories returned. His father's smile, the explosion that took his life, Victoria's cold expression as she announced his arranged marriage, the black SUVs chasing him through the forest. Then another image appeared, Emily, standing fearlessly between him and 6 armed men. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts before. He had faced hostile shareholders and ruthless competitors. Yet no one had ever risked their own life simply because another human being needed help. It unsettled him in the best possible way. Across the room, Emily quietly stepped outside onto the small porch, carrying an old blanket over her shoulders. She couldn't sleep either. The events of the day replayed endlessly in her mind. Who was Eric? Who were those armed men? Why had they searched so desperately? She looked toward the stars. Her father used to bring her onto this very porch on clear nights. He would point upward and say, "Whenever life feels dark, remember something, Em. Sailors don't find their way because the ocean is easy. They find their way because they never stop looking at the stars." She smiled sadly. "I still miss you, Dad." A tear slipped down her cheek. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. "You couldn't sleep either?" Ethan asked softly. Emily quickly wiped away the tear before turning around. "I could ask you the same thing." He leaned carefully against the porch railing, protecting his injured shoulder. "Couch is comfortable, so my thoughts aren't." Emily gave a faint smile. "Sea helps me think." He looked toward the water. "It's beautiful here." She paused. "Most people only notice the smell of fish." He laughed quietly. "I noticed that too." She nudged him gently with her elbow. "I was trying to be poetic." "You were. I ruined it." "A little." They both laughed. The silence that followed felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Emily spoke. "You don't have to tell me everything." Ethan looked at her. "But those men weren't ordinary people. They wanted to kill you." He hesitated. "They wanted to take me back." "Where?" He stared at the dark ocean. "I can't answer that yet." Emily nodded. "I figured. You aren't angry. I barely know you." He looked surprised. "Exactly." She shrugged. "People usually earn trust a little at a time." Those simple words struck Ethan harder than she realized. Trust. His father had spoken that same word countless times. Trust people because they earn it, not because they wear expensive suits. He found himself wondering what William would think of Emily. The answer came almost instantly. He would have admired her. Inside the cottage, Margaret watched quietly through the kitchen window. She smiled to herself. Old age had taught her to recognize certain things. The way Ethan unconsciously turned his body toward Emily despite the pain. The way Emily kept checking whether his bandage had started bleeding again without realizing she was doing it. Neither of them knew it yet. But something had already begun. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter, respect. Far beyond the cottage, hidden inside an abandoned fishing warehouse overlooking the village, Marcus Kane spread a detailed map across an old wooden table. His team gathered around. "There are only 3 roads leading out of Harbor Creek," Marcus said. He marked each route with a pen. "We'll block all of them before sunrise." One operative asked, "What about the fishing boats?" Marcus nodded. "Already taken care of that." Earlier that evening, posing as federal agents, two members of his team had quietly visited the harbor master. They claimed dangerous fugitives might attempt to steal a boat during the night. As a precaution, every fishing boat had been ordered to remain docked until further notice. The lie ensured Ethan would have no easy escape by sea. Another man unfolded aerial photographs of the village. Marcus pointed toward Emily's cottage. "We strike after dawn." "Wait." Because villagers wake early, he traced a second line across the map. "When everyone leaves for the market and the docks, there will be fewer witnesses." Others nodded. Marcus looked once more at the cottage through a cracked warehouse window. "Girl may interfere." One operative smirked. "She won't be a problem." Marcus didn't respond. He remembered the determination in Emily's eyes earlier that day. People driven by compassion often behaved unpredictably. That made them dangerous. Back at the cottage, Ethan's eyes drifted toward the silver locket around Emily's neck again. The engraved crest continued to bother him. He had definitely seen it before. But where? A forgotten memory stirred. Years ago, when Ethan was about 10, he had wandered into his father's private study while William examined an old file marked with the image of a nearly identical crest. His father had quickly closed the folder. Some stories aren't ready to be told yet. At the time, Ethan hadn't understood. Now standing beside Emily beneath a sky full of stars, that long-buried memory returned with startling clarity. Could it really be the same symbol? No. That would be impossible, wouldn't it? Just then, a cold breeze swept across the porch. Emily shivered. "You should get back inside," Ethan said. "So should you," she smiled. "Doctor's orders," he smiled back. "Fish seller's orders." As they turned toward the door, neither of them noticed a faint red laser dot briefly flicker across the cottage window from a distant hill before disappearing. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And with sunrise only a few hours away, Harbor Creek was about to become the center of a deadly confrontation that would change every life in the village. The first rays of sunlight crept over Harbor Creek, painting the ocean in shades of gold as the village slowly came to life. Fishing boats rocked gently against the docks while fishermen loaded fresh nets onto their vessels. Children chased one another along the shoreline before school, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the village bakery. For most people, it looked like another ordinary morning. For Emily Carter, it was anything but. She had barely slept. The moment she stepped into the small kitchen, she quietly checked on Ethan. He was already awake, sitting upright on the couch. "Good morning," she said. He smiled. "I was going to help make breakfast." She looked at his bandaged shoulder and raised an eyebrow with one arm. "Been told I'm resourceful," she laughed. "Been told you're stubborn." Margaret looked up from the stove. "Only known him one day and I already agree." Three of them shared a quiet laugh. For a brief moment, the danger surrounding them felt very far away. Emily placed a plate of toast and scrambled eggs on the small table. Ethan looked surprised. "I thought you said food was running low." Emily froze for the briefest second. Margaret answered before she could. "Neighbor brought us a few eggs yesterday." That was only half the truth. Margaret had quietly traded one of her treasured knitted blankets to a nearby widow at dawn in exchange for the eggs and a loaf of bread. She knew Emily would never agree to it if she found out. It was a sacrifice made without complaint. The old woman simply believed that no wounded guest should begin the day hungry. Another quiet layer of compassion settled over the household. As they prepared to eat, someone knocked on the front door. Emily frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." She opened it. Standing outside was Walter Brooks. The elderly fisherman removed his cap politely. "Morning, morning, Walter." His usual smile was missing. "I thought you should know." He lowered his voice. "Strangers have been asking questions around the harbor." Emily's expression changed instantly. "What kind of strangers?" "They claim they're federal agents." Ethan slowly looked up from the table. Walter continued, showing people a photograph. Emily's stomach tightened. "A photograph of who?" Walter shook his head. "I couldn't get close enough to see." He looked past Emily toward Ethan. "But something doesn't feel right." Years at sea had sharpened Walter's instincts. Storms often announced themselves long before the first wave appeared. This felt exactly the same. Emily thanked him. "We'll be careful." Walter nodded. Before leaving, he quietly slipped a small paper bag into Emily's hands. "Fresh bread." You don't have to, I know, he smiled gently. But I want to. As he walked away, Ethan watched silently. Does he always do things like that? Emily smiled. He pretends he's grumpy. Seems kind. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. So are you. Emily quickly changed the subject. You should eat before your medicine. She handed him 2 pain tablets Margaret had saved from an old prescription. The dosage was safe, and Margaret had checked the expiration date the previous evening. In a village with limited medical access, families often kept unopened medication for emergencies. Another potential logic gap quietly resolved itself. Outside the cottage, hidden among the pine trees, Marcus Kane lowered his binoculars. He watched Walter leave. Then he spoke into his radio. Everyone's awake. One of his men responded. Looked toward the village square. Too many people. Not yet. We wait until the fish market opens. Why? Half the village will be distracted. He had learned long ago that chaos made witnesses unreliable. Timing mattered more than force. Back inside, Emily gathered her fish baskets. I have to go to the market. Margaret looked concerned. Maybe you should stay today. Emily shook her head. If I don't sell fish. He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. No sales meant no medicine, no food, no survival. Ethan slowly stood. Come with you. Emily stared at him. No, I can help carry the baskets. She almost laughed. You can barely lift your arm. Use the other one. You'll reopen your wound. Walk slowly. Margaret folded her arms. Raised enough stubborn people for one lifetime. Both Emily and Ethan looked at her. She sighed dramatically. Fine. You may walk to the gate. No farther. Emily smiled. Deal. As they stepped outside together, Grace Walker happened to be passing on her bicycle. She immediately slammed on the brakes. Eyes widened. So the rumors were true. Emily's smile faded. Grace slowly climbed off the bicycle. I wondered why people kept saying the cursed fish girl brought a strange man home. She looked Ethan up and down. My. A mocking grin spread across her face. You certainly don't waste time. Emily took a deep breath. Good morning, Grace. Grace ignored the greeting. Who's he? A friend. Grace burst into laughter. You? She looked Ethan in the eye. Careful. People around here disappear after getting close to her. Emily's face fell. The cruel word struck an old wound she had spent years trying to ignore. Grace noticed. She smiled wider. You know, first her father vanished. Then her mother abandoned her. She stepped closer. Maybe you should ask yourself why. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Until now he had remained polite. Now his voice became calm, very calm. That's enough. Grace blinked. What? I said. He took one slow step forward despite the pain. That's enough. Something in his tone made Grace instinctively step backward. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't threatening. But the quiet authority in his voice was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Emily looked at him in surprise for just a moment. He didn't sound like an ordinary fisherman at all. Grace recovered quickly. She scoffed. Oh, I see. The stray dog learned how to bark. She climbed back onto her bicycle. This village always enjoys a good scandal. She rode away laughing. Emily looked down. I'm sorry. Ethan frowned. What? People treat me like that all the time. They shouldn't. They always have. Ethan looked toward the road where Grace had disappeared. His jaw tightened. He had spent years watching wealthy executives destroy lives with money and influence. Now he was witnessing cruelty of a different kind, small, petty, relentless. He silently made himself a promise. One day, no one in Harbor Creek would ever humiliate Emily Carter again. Neither of them noticed Marcus Kane watching from the tree line. He lowered his binoculars slowly. A faint smile crossed his face. So, they're leaving the cottage. He reached for his radio. This is it. Across the village, black SUVs quietly started their engines. The sound of engines shattered the peaceful morning. Emily had barely reached the end of the dirt path leading from her cottage when 3 black SUVs rolled slowly into Harbor Creek. They didn't belong. Everyone in the village noticed immediately. Fishermen paused while carrying their nets. Shopkeepers stopped arranging their merchandise. Children quit playing and watched curiously as the expensive vehicles drove toward the center of town. Harbor Creek rarely saw visitors. It certainly never saw convoys like this. Emily instinctively looked at Ethan. His face turned pale, not from the wound, from recognition. They found me. His voice was barely above a whisper. Emily's heart skipped a beat. So it really is you they're looking for. Before Ethan could answer, Margaret stepped out onto the porch. She had heard the engines too. The old woman's instincts screamed that danger had arrived. Ethan. she said quietly before correcting herself. Eric, you need to leave. Ethan looked at her. If I run now, they'll follow me. If you stay, they'll come here. A heavy silence settled over the three of them. Emily looked from Ethan to the approaching SUVs, then back again. Come inside. You need to hide. They'll search the house first, she thought quickly. The cottage was too obvious, the fishing sheds, no, the church. Too public. Then she remembered something. The abandoned smokehouse behind the old cannery. Years ago, villagers had stopped using it after newer refrigeration equipment arrived. Few people ever went there anymore except children chasing crabs along the shoreline. My father's smokehouse, she whispered. Margaret's eyes widened. It still has the underground storage cellar. Emily nodded. The entrance is hidden beneath the old fish-drying racks. Margaret immediately understood. Daniel had built the cellar years earlier to store salted fish during hurricane season. Only a handful of long-time villagers even remembered it existed, a perfect hiding place. Another carefully foreshadowed detail now paid off naturally. Emily looked at Ethan. Can you walk that far? I have to. She grabbed his uninjured arm. We leave through the back. Just then, Grace Walker's voice echoed from the road. Emily, the three of them froze. Grace was riding her bicycle straight toward the cottage. She had clearly seen the SUVs. She stopped outside the gate, pretending to catch her breath. My father wants everyone at the market. Emily forced a smile. Why? Grace grinned. Some federal agents are asking questions. She deliberately glanced toward Ethan, looking for someone. Margaret tightened her grip on the porch railing. Grace continued, enjoying every second, offering a reward. Emily's heart sank. A reward? Grace nodded enthusiastically. A very big one. She leaned closer. Wonder who the lucky person will be. Then she smiled directly at Ethan. Funny, you look nervous. Ethan remained silent. Grace studied him for another few seconds. Then she shrugged dramatically. Well, if you happen to know anything, she pointed toward the village square. I'd hurry. She rode away. Emily watched her disappear. She suspects something. Margaret nodded. Then something. Inside one of the SUVs parked near the harbor, Marcus Kane watched the exchange through tinted windows. One of his operatives spoke. Girl on the bicycle keeps looking toward the cottage. Marcus smiled faintly. People like her always do. What do you mean? They mistake gossip for intelligence. He opened the passenger door. Sometimes they're useful. Across the market, Richard Walker stood proudly beside Grace as Marcus approached. Good morning, Richard said. Marcus displayed a fabricated federal identification badge. We're searching for a dangerous fugitive. Richard immediately became eager to help. Anything you need. Marcus held up a photograph. It was Ethan, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit. Richard studied it carefully. Never seen him. Grace looked over her father's shoulder. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The face, the jawline, the eyes. She slowly turned toward Emily's cottage in the distance, then back to the photograph. A realization began forming. Marcus noticed the change immediately. You recognize him? Grace hesitated. Richard interrupted. My daughter would certainly tell you if she did. Marcus looked only at Grace, not her father. Wouldn't you? Grace swallowed. She remembered the wounded stranger, the blood-stained bandage, Emily's nervous expression. Then she remembered the words Marcus had spoken, dangerous fugitive. Envy toward Emily fought against her uncertainty. Finally she pointed. I don't know for sure. Marcus waited. But yesterday she looked toward Emily's cottage. I saw a man who looked a little like him. Richard frowned. Grace. What? I'm only trying to help. Marcus smiled politely. Been very helpful. He returned to the SUV the moment the door closed. His expression hardened, moving him. One operative asked, How do you know? Marcus looked toward Emily's cottage. Because the girl's instinct was to protect him. He had watched her face carefully while Grace spoke. Fear, urgency, decision, all within seconds. People's expressions often revealed what words concealed. Team 1 blocks the north road. 2 takes the harbor. The rest come with me. Meanwhile, behind Emily's cottage, Ethan struggled to keep pace. The pain in his shoulder intensified with every step. I'm slowing you down. Emily tightened her grip on him. Then we'll walk slower. You should leave me. No, they'll stop chasing you. No, they are after me, not you. Emily stopped walking. She turned to face him. I don't know who you are. I know. I don't know what you've done. I know. I don't even know if you're telling me the truth. His eyes lowered. She took a slow breath. But I know one thing. He looked up. People chasing you don't look like the good guys. The first time since escaping the Harrison estate. Ethan smiled without sadness. A smile filled with genuine admiration. He had spent years surrounded by brilliant lawyers, economists, politicians, and executives. Yet this young woman, armed only with compassion and common sense, had judged the situation more clearly than all of them. As they disappeared into the narrow trail leading toward the abandoned smokehouse, neither of them noticed Grace Walker watching from the top of a nearby hill. She had quietly followed them, and now, she knew exactly where they were going. Grace slowly reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. One phone call, one reward, one decision, would change all of their lives forever. The old wooden hatch groaned as the crowbars forced it upward. Dust rained from the ceiling of the underground cellar. Emily's heart stopped. Ethan slowly rose to his feet despite the burning pain in his shoulder. He positioned himself between Emily and the wooden ladder, his breathing uneven but his eyes calm. "No," he whispered. Emily grabbed his arm. "What are you doing? If they come down," he looked at her. "They're coming for me. They'll hurt you. They'll hurt you if I don't stop them." Emily shook her head fiercely. "You can barely stand. Survived worse." She stared at him. "You don't know that." A brief moment, Ethan smiled. Right, he didn't, not anymore. The carefully ordered world he had once lived in had collapsed in less than 48 hours. Above them, Marcus Kane watched the hatch slowly open. A cool breeze escaped from the darkness below. "So," he spoke loudly enough for those beneath to hear. "Make this simple." Silence answered him. "Know you're down there." Another pause. "My employer wants only one man." Emily clenched her fists. Marcus continued. "Hand him over. You both walk away." Promise echoed through the cellar. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He knew Marcus was lying. Victoria Harrison never left loose ends. She hadn't spent years consolidating power just to allow witnesses to live. A quiet memory surfaced. Nearly 3 years earlier, Ethan had questioned his mother's sudden dismissal of the company's longtime chief financial officer, Thomas Reed. Thomas had served the Harrison family faithfully for almost 25 years. When Ethan asked why he had disappeared overnight, Victoria simply smiled. "Some people know too much." Weeks later, Thomas vanished completely. No resignation, no farewell, no trace. At the time, Ethan wanted to believe it was coincidence. Now, he understood. Marcus wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to erase a problem. Emily stepped toward the ladder. "I'm going." Ethan immediately caught her wrist. "No, they said they only want you. They're lying. You don't know that." "Do?" She searched his face for the first time since meeting him. She saw absolute certainty, not fear, not panic. Experience. Whoever Eric truly was, he understood people like Marcus far better than she did. Above them, Marcus glanced at his watch. His patience was wearing thin. Last chance. No answer. He nodded toward one of his operatives. Tear the floor apart. Crowbars crashed into the wooden beams. The entire cellar shook violently. Splinters fell from the ceiling. Margaret, who had secretly followed the trail to the smokehouse after realizing Emily had left with Ethan, watched everything from behind a cluster of thick bushes 50 yards away. Her hands trembled. She had arrived only moments earlier, too late to warn them, too late to stop anything. Tears filled her eyes. Dear God. She looked toward the village. No one else had noticed yet. Most people were still gathered near the market. Then she remembered something. Walter. Without another thought, the elderly woman turned and hurried as fast as her aching legs could carry her toward the harbor. Meanwhile, inside the cellar, the hatch burst completely open. Sunlight flooded the darkness. Marcus looked down. Their eyes met. "There you are." Armed operatives immediately started climbing the ladder. Emily grabbed an old wooden shovel leaning against the wall. Ethan looked at her in disbelief. "What are you doing?" She tightened her grip. "My father taught me something else." Before he could ask what, the first operative reached the bottom rung. Emily swung. Crack. The heavy wooden handle struck the man's forearm. He cried out in pain, losing his grip before crashing backward into the second operative. Both men tumbled onto the floor above. Marcus stepped back. For the first time that day, he looked impressed. "Got spirit." Emily raised the shovel again. Her hands shook, not because she lacked courage, because she had never struck another person before. A childhood memory flashed across her mind. Daniel had been teaching her how to use an oar against strong ocean currents. "Strength isn't about hurting people," he had said. "It's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves." Those words echoed through her heart now. She wasn't fighting out of hatred. She was protecting someone. Marcus slowly removed his pistol. His expression became cold. This ends now. He aimed directly toward the cellar. Ethan saw it happen without thinking. He shoved Emily sideways. The gunshot exploded through the smokehouse. The bullet struck Ethan high in his right side. He staggered backward. Emily screamed, collapsed against the stone wall before sliding to the ground. Blood spread rapidly across his shirt. Everything seemed to stop. Emily dropped beside him. "No," her voice broke. "No, no, stay with me." Ethan struggled to breathe. His vision blurred. He reached weakly into the inside pocket of his hoodie. Emily watched as he pulled out a small leather wallet, not an ordinary wallet. A luxury card holder embossed with a silver crest. Inside was a black titanium identification card. It slipped from his trembling fingers and landed on the cellar floor. Emily picked it up automatically. She looked down. Her eyes widened. Printed beneath the photograph were the words, ETHAN William Harrison, Chief Executive Officer Harrison Global Holdings. She stared at the card, then at the wounded man lying before her. Her lips trembled. He looked into her eyes. His carefully guarded secret was finally gone. "My name," he coughed painfully. "Eric, it's Ethan." Emily could barely speak. "The billionaire," he nodded weakly. "I'm sorry I lied." Tears streamed down her face. "You were protecting me." Before Ethan could answer, a voice thundered from outside the smokehouse. "Drop your weapons." Marcus spun around. Dozens of fishermen led by Walter Brooks rushed toward the building carrying heavy fishing hooks, wooden oars, ropes, and net poles. Behind them came nearly the entire village, even Richard Walker, even Grace. Grace looked horrified when she saw Ethan bleeding. The envelope of reward money suddenly felt like a stone in her handbag. Marcus quickly assessed the situation. Too many witnesses, too many people. This was no longer a controlled extraction. He lowered his weapon. "We're leaving," one operative protested. "But the target will get another chance." Within seconds, the SUV sped away, disappearing in clouds of dust before anyone could stop them. Silence settled over the smokehouse. Emily cradled Ethan's head in her lap. "Stay with me. You promised you'd recover. You promised." Ethan smiled faintly despite the pain. "Try." An ambulance siren echoed faintly in the distance. Walter had already called for emergency medical help. As Emily held Ethan's hand tightly, the black titanium card remained beside her knee. She looked at it once more, then back at him. The poor fish-selling girl who had been mocked, humiliated, and called cursed her entire life had unknowingly saved one of the richest men in America. But neither of them yet knew the greatest truth of all. Around Emily's neck, the silver locket had slipped free during the struggle. As Grace bent to help, she noticed it lying open. Inside was the faded family photograph. Grace frowned. Before she could speak, Walter picked up the locket. The moment he saw the picture, his face drained of color, his hands began to shake. He whispered so softly that only Margaret heard him. "It can't be." Margaret looked at him. "What is it?" Walter stared at the photograph in stunned silence. Then he uttered the words that froze everyone nearby. "Daniel Carter didn't die." End of Part 1. 2b continued in Part 2.